Chapter 10 of Hard to Beat by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. The Abduction of Bob Brooks. Now that Bob had gone into the market again, his thoughts naturally were much taken up with the fluctuations of C, H, and D. For the next few days the stock hovered around 52. When the exchange closed on Saturday noon, the third day after he bought the stock, the price had reached 58 and a fraction. Well, I'm $700 to the good anyway, leaving out the matter of commission, which will be $125 when I come to sell. Brokers charge 1/8 of 1% for each 100 shares of stock purchased for a client, and a similar amount for selling the same. It was a cold, drizzling afternoon, and Bob, instead of going off somewhere with Phil, as was his custom, took the 3rd Avenue L at Fulton Street to 9th Street, and went to the Cooper Union Reading Room, where he put in several hours reading the current magazines. He reached his home in West 107th Street in time for supper, and then he went out to the butcher's and grocer's to make sundry purchases for his mother. At 9 o'clock there came a ring of the bell of their flat. "I wonder who that is at this hour?" asked Nellie Brooks, looking up from a book she was reading. "Push in the button, Bob." The boy went to the kitchen and pushed the knob that opened the front door. In a moment the bell rang again, more vigorously than before. Bob pushed in the button again, but in spite of that the bell rang a 3rd time. "Maybe that's Phil and he won't come up. I'll go down, Nellie." He put on his hat and scooted down the 2 flights of stairs, for the Brooks family lived on the 3rd floor. It was raining at a pretty lively rate, and a man with a soft hat pulled down over his eyes stood in the vestibule. "Are you Bob Brooks?" he asked when the boy opened the inside door. "That's my name. Was it you who rung our bell just now?" "Yes. Mr. Sharpley is in the carriage outside and wants to see you." "Mr. Sharpley?" exclaimed the boy in no little astonishment. Stockbrokers were not in the habit of hunting up their messenger boys except under distinctly unusual circumstances. "Something's up, sure pop," he muttered as he ran out on the walk and over to the carriage door. The man followed close at his heels. "Here he is," he said to the occupant of the vehicle, opening the door. "Step in, Bob," said a voice which he did not recognize as Mr. Sharpley's. He put one foot on the step, then paused, as if in doubt. The man outside gave him a shove that sent him against the person inside, and quickly slamming the door, the man mounted the box and drove hurriedly toward 8th Avenue. The person inside had caught Bob around the neck, and before the boy could make any effectual resistance against his rough treatment, a handkerchief which gave forth a pungent odor was pressed over his mouth and nostrils. Bob had now awakened to the fact that he was the victim of a ruse to get him in the carriage, though for what purpose he could not exactly understand. Naturally, he began to struggle to extricate himself from the iron grip of the unknown in the carriage. He was not an easy proposition to handle under ordinary circumstances, for steady gymnastic and basketball exercise had hardened and developed his muscles, and as he always looked carefully after his general health, he was in good physical shape. But he had been taken at a disadvantage to begin with, and now the fumes of the strong chloroform solution were sapping both his strength and his senses. The result of it all was that every moment rendered him less capable of holding out. Finally, his head fell back, and he lay like a log in the man's arms. Propping his victim up in the seat, the stranger threw open both windows of the swiftly moving vehicle, which had by this time turned into 125th Street and was speeding westward. "Phew!" exclaimed the man as he stuck his head out of the window. "I thought that stuff would fetch me as well as him." The cool breeze and the cold rain splashing onto his face speedily revived the stranger. At that instant a big arc light in front of a saloon threw the man's countenance in full relief. It was the face of Mr. William Smithers. The carriage passed the brilliantly lighted West End Theater, and soon afterward turned into Manhattan Avenue, keeping straight on toward the Fort Lee Ferry. The boat was in, and so the driver, after he had paid the fare, drove the carriage on board. By that time Mr. Smithers, having rid the carriage of the fumes of the drug, had closed the windows tight again, so that had curious eyes sought to penetrate the interior of the vehicle, no one would have guessed whether it carried even a single passenger. In a few minutes the boat pulled out from the dock, and in a short time had crossed the river and was made fast to its berth on the other side. Then the carriage slowly drove on shore and started off on one side of the trolley road. This road it followed for a matter of 4 or 5 miles, until the lights of Hackensack hove in view, when the driver turned to the left along the highway which skirts the river. 2 or 3 miles below, the carriage crossed the Hackensack River on a short bridge, which landed the vehicle right onto the meadows, when the driver slowed down to a walk, as though feeling his way forward in the darkness and the rain. The horses splashed and floundered in the soft muck, dotted with innumerable pools of water, every once in a while striking tolerably hard ground until it finally came to a stop before a dark, unsavory-looking building. A dismal house it was when, on this occasion, the cold wind swept the blinding rain across the Hackensack meadows. The rising tide flapped monotonously along the reeds and flags which grew upon the banks of the nearby stream, a sluggish branch of which flowed immediately under the rear windows of the rickety-looking building itself. The driver descended from his perch and opened the carriage door. "Here we are, Mr. Smithers." "All right. Thump on the door and rouse up Mr. Grubb." It looked as though they had been expected, for a smart knock brought an elderly man and a light to the front door. "Lend a hand, Hubbard," said Mr. Smithers sharply. Between the driver and the big red-faced man the unconscious Bob Brooks was taken from the carriage and carried up the short rickety steps and into the house, when Mr. Grubb closed the door and piloted them to a very plain-looking apartment in the rear. A brisk fire was burning in the grate of an old-fashioned cooking stove, on top of which a tea-kettle was singing its cheery song. Bob was placed in a chair so that he leaned up against one of the walls of the room. "Hocus, eh?" remarked Mr. Grubb, jerking a thumb toward the boy. "Correct," answered Mr. Smithers grimly. "Now, let us have a hot drink, if you please. I see the kettle is boiling." Mr. Grubb proceeded at once to brew a bowl of whiskey punch, at which he seemed an adept. It was soon ready, and the man Hubbard, who had experienced a long and wet drive, and expected presently to face another on his way back to New York, seized his mug and drank the stuff with greedy relish. By the time he had put a couple more under his belt, he was warm and dry again, and ready to go. Mr. Smithers handed him a $20 bill, and also a 5-spot, and then the burly driver, pulling his oiled coat around him, was accompanied to the door and there dismissed by Mr. Grubb. "We'll take the boy upstairs now and let him sleep off the drug," said Mr. Smithers when his elderly accomplice returned to the room, and between them they carried Bob to a room above, laying him upon a miserable bed in an equally miserable-looking room. End of Chapter 10.